Here, stencil I use to create monoprints. Okay, now monoprints didn't work, but it was a cool little experiment. This is an experiment. Took influence from the patterns, the repetitiveness, very common in the sounds I heard. Swoopiness, the whoopiness here. Developed that sound, wanted to use that because I thought it looked cool. Wanted to use it in an experiment. This experiment with prints and stencils. Cut it out. This swoopiness, whoopiness, kind of. This is the stencil which I used for the prints. I'll wax some ink over the top just to add some depth to the first print. The thing about the print which I thought was quite cool was the roughness and the kind of the texture over the top. This kind of rough matte texture. Really cool, really nice. Thing about it was, it's a bit kind of, that is good, but it's also, it's just, I don't know, it is what it is, you know. It looks good though, it looks good. But you'll see I ran into a problem. Here, that's like a secondary print, colour, just black and white. It looks good as well, very dirty, very urban. I really would have liked to use something like this in my final piece. That's maybe something for next time which I'll work on, because I actually think it looks really good. It's a shame I didn't have something like this in my final piece. Maybe I can pretend it is in my final piece. But yeah, it's the same piece, just with that. Right, photograms and cyanotypes. Very big deal. We've got John and we've got Adam Fuss and we've got Susan and we've got Anna Atkins, alright? This is my experiments here. Got the patterns, but I like kind of the plain simplicity, the black and the white. This blue and the white kind of very cold, very still and, you know, cold and quiet and lonely and dim, like a grey afternoon. I don't know, it's just giving those connotations. And then we've got the photogram. The thing about the photogram is black and white. It's kind of very, it's good for a night landscape, you know. It wouldn't be like a sunny morning. It's a kind of a city at night. Sharp, bold lines, heavy gloss. So good textures and lines. If you wanted to describe those kind of things, those sounds, this is a good way, and was a good way for me to help describe those sounds in my final piece. These are just experiments I thought were pretty cool. These are my artists which I've researched. John Dugdale, you'll read about him, so I won't explain all of that. Bit of that. The thing about the photograms I liked is the translucency. You can play around with that, and also here with Anna Atkins, you can kind of, with different levels, different things, you can have different levels of translucency, which I thought works really well. It adds a bit of depth and just kind of whatever to the, not whatever, so, you know, it's cool, it's quite cool. Yeah. And then another thing which I was experimenting with, didn't go to plan, didn't get used to my final piece, are Luluminums. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's basically like photogram paper, but not photogram paper. Same way as cyanotypes, you'd expose it to the sun. I splashed vinegar and kind of lemon juice over the top, kind of stained the paper and made this kind of gritty, dirty texture. What happened was it came out a bit pale. I don't think I exposed it for long enough, but it came out a bit pale, and I don't like the effect it had on my pattern. My pattern, which I haven't actually introduced you to yet. But anyway, I thought that was quite cool to experiment with anyway. These are my letters, which I've done the same thing for. I exposed this for the right amount of time, but still didn't really like it. Just the colour, I feel like it wasn't the best to represent the island sounds that I was hearing. Quite cool though, very nice. Right, this is me playing around on Photoshop, more experimentation. Here, photos, putting my own photos on Photoshop. Got a pattern here. I used the idea of playing around with a photo I've taken on Photoshop in my final piece. I'd just like to say that. So that's an idea I've developed. Just playing around here. So this is a pattern of a box I took at my dad's house. Put it on Photoshop. Put the usual font from the usual theme developed from earlier on top of the box. Black and white here. Taking influence from these guys here, over here. Kind of, you got that bit of that. Yeah, well, you see, they're helping me understand cyanotypes and photograms and different effects of each. So here's the final product. Here you've got the acetates, cyanotypes. You can see the difference which having a blue cyanotype makes. If it's all red, which I don't use again, it's kind of very kind of loud and angry, and red, it's got certain connotations, whereas blue is very cold and it brings out the white, makes the white kind of quite, it's a piercing white, but it's also gentle at the same time, and there's just something cold about it, and still, it's just it's weird. This is a failed cyanotype. I didn't expose it for long enough, so it looks bad, very faint. I learned from that. Made sure I exposed all my final piece cyanotypes for long enough, because otherwise they would have ended up bad like this one. As you can see, the photograms compared to the cyanotypes, very more black and white, look quite vintage compared to these, was a bit more modern, a bit more playful. These are very vintage, very black and white, kind of heavy. And these effects are all something I took into consideration when I was doing my final piece. How could I use the photogram to describe an urban sound compared to how I would be using a cyanotype to describe an urban sound? It's very important and very useful, and it's something I definitely thought of. Right, my artist research and my research. I chose five artists. Obviously, John Dugdale, Anton Fuss. I was using them for colour and medium with John Dugdale. The that kind of like cold colour, a cold hue. Not very nice, but it's like a cold night. Adam, you've got the sharpness and the bold heaviness of the black and white. Very useful. Owen. I enjoyed kind of noticing these patterns, so I thought that I could use a pattern in my final piece to describe an urban sound, taking inspiration from Owen. His patterns are very cool, and geometric, repetitive patterns. I thought taking inspiration from his work and plugging it into my own patterns. Plugging it into my own patterns would help describe the urban landscape. Audible urban landscape. Paula Scher, her work is all about font and the composition behind the font and the typography, how the background how the font interacts with the shapes and the background. So you, me, for example, I just thought that was really cool because she's kind of making the letters interact with the background and the composition, and doing this she could add a whole lot of emphasis to the words and the meaning behind the words. So you can see here it's kind of like they're joined together. There's so many layers of you and me, very emotional, very, very explanatory, self-explanatory. The words speak to you, and so does the imagery. That's something which Paula has in common with Saul Bass. His imagery and his font, the way they interact with each other, but also the kind of the colour and the boldness and the simplicity, I thought was really helpful. Having quite a simple image to understand, to digest. It'd be a cool medium to help explain my urban sounds. So I thought it would be cool to take inspiration from him and use it in my final piece. Okay, right, experiments. Foam core, got the ink, took that because we'd used it before, thought it was quite cool. Foam core, I was using different surfaces. This is plastic, it's manufactured, it's quite man-made, just playing around with different textures. Got this chain, it's quite dirty, quite heavy, gritty, still. And this rusty piece of metal, I just thought I picked it up, I thought it was quite cool. It's metal, obviously has audible connotations, thought I could use it to help describe the sounds. I just played around with them. The image, the kind of paint, whatever, it didn't work out very well, but I still thought the materials themselves could be useful and were useful, so this experiment actually helped my final piece. So here, my squeak experiment. Yeah, so this, I kind of made this using the idea from the prints I'd made before, so the stencil. See, the stencil, I tried to make it into the print didn't work, but I used the stencil idea. Right, and this here, the stencil idea, and the cutout imagery, all of that, the font, influences a lot of my final piece. So this medium is a big deal. So it is just me developing a sound. It wanted to be the squeaky kind of bike sound. Hold on. Oh, right, it will be somewhere. And then here's squeal bike sound as well. I like this circular. This becomes a theme, alright? Just some font. Trying to have the font. This is a big thing. Trying to have the font portray the sounds, just like Saul and Paula have the font portray the imagery or what's going on inside their book or what the poster's trying to show you. My font is trying to describe the urban sounds. As you can see here, this is the cutout on the red paper. I actually think it looks really good. I think it's amazing. Right, the experiment with the squeak. What was good and what was bad? I think you can see what was bad. The print didn't work, leaked all over the place. I didn't like it at all. Just not very clean, not aesthetically pleasing. Didn't do the stencil any justice, because have a look at the stencil, it's amazing, alright? And I thought that was really cool, stencil, so I used that idea. And instead of using the prints, this is what I did. I scanned it, I put the scan into Photoshop, I neatened it up a bit, put colour behind it, and I created these prints here. Alright, so this is just a bit of the process. Started off with that, cut it out, cut that out, done that, made the font, that's all good, that's all cool. And then that's obviously that. What I liked about this was the sharpness, how clean it was, and that's what I used in my final piece. That's what I used in my final piece, and it was also influenced from Saul and Paula, their kind of book and poster ideas with the loud letters and the composition. Got the same thing here with the squeal. This was quite cool actually, that was quite good. That was a secondary print. First print almost worked, but it bled here. Sad. Didn't work, and I didn't like it, to be honest. So I didn't use it in my final piece. But it was fun to experiment with anyway. Here is the cutout, again, really good. I like it. Right, and here's the concertina I was playing around with, I was experimenting with. This is my first one. I wanted to know, how can I use this book to describe urban sounds with font, imagery and patterns? So I wanted to play around with the cutting out, like the stencils I made, see how they looked in the concertina. It's alright. Cutting out again, got the patterns here, you know. Owen Jones and the patterns I'd hide, see how it worked in the concertina and see how it interacted with the stencils. I've got some black paint here, just some rough black paint, taking inspiration from that kind of stuff. It's cool, kind of cool effect, dirty, grimy, grotty. Really aggressive, yeah, that's supposed to be like a sharp, kind of aggressive crash. Polar, this is me trying to think what Polar's reaction would look like, if that's what I thought it would look like. Kind of blocky text, different ways, different, that. And this is what I thought, this is how I thought Saul would react to it. This is less, I don't think this is very audible, but I think the imagery helps describe the scene quite well. So that's something I thought about Saul's work. This is very similar to Saul's work, so yeah. And then pattern on the back. I was just trying to think what how Owen would have reacted. And this is the volume off sign, but as a pattern. I didn't know what to do, so I did that. And I thought it was quite cool. And the pattern, obviously, I continued into my final piece, not this one, but the idea of the pattern. And with little hint of Owen Jones in it. Part 2 over.